Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Recent reports and roundtable findings suggest a growing pattern when it comes to hybrid operations threatening critical infrastructure around the Baltic region. Now, from undersea cable disruptions to suspicious maritime maneuvers, NATO allies are increasingly concerned about so-called gray zone tactics attributed to state-linked actors. Joining us today on TVP World to assess the strategic stakes is General Jarosław Kraszewski, a former Armed Forces Supervising Department Director of the Polish National Security Bureau. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Can you help us understand how this gray zone operation differ from traditional military threats, and why are they so difficult to deter and to attribute?
In a traditional, conventional warfighting, we have two sides, at least two sides, with uniform and flags on the shoulders, and everybody knows who is the friendly forces, who is the enemy. In the gray zone or hybrid operations, it's very difficult to first of all determine what kind of assets and the ways the enemy is supposed to use to conduct the hybrid operations. And you don't have typical soldiers like during the combat operations, traditional combat operations. The enemy is so keen to use the decoys, different methods, combination of the assets, and combination of the, for instance, false flags, shadow ships, and those types of assets. Just the main purpose of such operations is just to make a confusion who is the real executor of the operations inside the gray zone or as a part of the hybrid operations. That's the main difference.
What are the most recent operation that has taken place that kind of brought this back to the forefront of these discussions again? Is it like an emerging pattern, or is it a sign of a broader strategy?
It's a part of the broader strategy, and right now, Russian Federation, since the very beginning, they have been using the Gerasimov strategy to conduct exactly the combat operations together, or meanwhile as a combination with the hybrid operations. And after 3 years, they are aware that they haven't reached the strategic objectives, and right now the main purpose of hybrid operations and the operations inside the gray zone is just to disrupt the ways, lines of communication, lines of delivering supplies to Ukrainian theater of war, including the different types of military equipment, different types of ammunition, and so on and so forth. And as a second, hybrid operations and the operations inside the gray zone is just to make our will to support Ukrainians or any other states being occupied by the enemy, and decrease the level of positive support and to reach the very negative approach to the operations like we are having right now in Ukraine. And that's the broader strategy, which is very famous for the Russian administration.
Right. So when it comes to the region, critical infrastructure, how vulnerable is it? And particularly with these undersea cable pipelines, offshore energy platforms, are they kind of exposed to these form of covert interference?
Exactly. It's very easy to hit the critical infrastructure like energy supply stations, cables under the water, and other installations installed under the water or on the ground or above the ground. during the last couple of years before the war in Ukraine got started, we were living in a society and with a mentality that there is no supposed to be any war in Europe, specifically in the Central and Western Europe. This is why, in my opinion, the governments of the particular states in Europe didn't put a lot of and didn't make a lot of efforts to protect the key infrastructure in a proper way. And the Ukrainian war showed us that there is a new asset which is so important during the combat operations. I'm talking right now about the drones. It's very difficult to protect the key infrastructure elements against the drones and the UAVs attacks conducted in the air. Right now, because I've been engaged in drone production and UAV production. Only one successful way to fight against the drones and the UAVs is just using jammers. It's not so easy because if you use such devices, your other electronic equipment is useless during the jammers operation. Another way to fight against drones and UAVs is just to use the minigun systems. Those are heavy rifles which can shoot a lot of rounds in the air. For instance, the very famous one, I don't want to say the name of the company, can shoot like 3,000 rounds a minute. So it's a lot. We are looking for another ways to fight against the drones, but we have to be aware that key elements of the critical infrastructure are supposed to be the main targets for the drone and UAVs operations in the future.
So these seem to be ways that the military can safeguard these infrastructure. But when it comes to coordination, does it exist between the Baltic NATO members and the EU allies to try to counter these potential threats as well?
Yes, as you know, at the beginning, probably, if I'm not mistaken, the Baltic states created a new headquarters, Navy headquarters, which is in charge of the Baltic security, including the key elements of the critical infrastructure. I mean, the pipelines and the cables connecting Baltic states with Sweden and Denmark, Finland, Norway, and so on and so forth. But they are also in charge of protecting our airspace against any aggressive operations conducted by Russian Federation. So we are exposed to such operations mostly every day. We just fly into our airspace and for a couple of seconds, maybe a couple of minutes, and fly back to regional corridor of the missions we are supposed to conduct. But this is done by purpose. We want to check out how our counter systems react on such incidents. Probably they are listening using the special equipment to go into the radio stations used by the military, and they would like to know what kind of techniques and procedures we are implementing in such events. Also, they would like to know the standard operating procedures used by the specifically NATO states during the operations conducted by the enemy's combat air jets in our airspace. That's main purposes of such operations conducted by Russians.
I'm also curious about the operation of the Shadow Fleet tankers, because we do know that outside of just kind of helping Russia circumvent sanction as well, there's a lot of allegations that these are also being used to sever undersea cables and carry out these operations. If these were found to be true, do you think that NATO or as these allied countries have any kind of legal way to, either confiscate them, dock them, or make sure that they no longer pose a threat to the infrastructure around this area?
As I said, we are coming back to the beginning of our interview, and it's normal operations. So everybody has to have the national flag on the shoulders, and including ships. Doesn't matter if the ship is a combat or trading, I mean civilian one. It has to be marked by the regulations. We have a multinational regulation documents related to the trading and using the international waters as well as the national waters. This is why NATO has a legal foundation to use the combat assets coming from the NATO Navy commands and the national support for the NATO Navy commands. And the good step, the previous question, is just exactly the new HQ being in charge of the Baltic Sea, and probably the same is going to happen regarding the Black Sea. And if such incidents are supposed to occur more frequently, NATO, besides let's say the diplomacy and diplomatic way, very polite, just warning and crossing as close as possible to such shadow fleets, just giving them special commands on the radio stations just to move on and to leave the current position, not to stay longer than a couple of minutes. They will use warning shots just to make the processes, what I have mentioned before, much faster than we expected.
Yes.
But again, NATO has a lot of regulations, has a lot of tools to react on any incidents on the waters.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.